Hi, I'm Patrick Palm, and this is the Learn from Leaders podcast. In this show, I interview favorite customers and other interesting leaders in product development, marketing, HR, executive management, investors. You find favorite leaders in many different places and in organizations doing game development and publishing, software as a service, and other tech companies, and big enterprises, going from very centralized command and control kind of organizations to a more modern way of working with a culture with high team autonomy and better alignment towards the company goals and values. So let's go.
Ben, what was the biggest crossroads in your career? Or maybe there was more than one.
Yeah, there's 2, I think, that jump out in especially my role as a producer in game development. One actually, the more recent one was quite a negative overall experience that was very important to have had, and the TLDR of it, I was suddenly placed in an environment where I had to contend with a political, reality. And a negative political reality of the place I was working. Um, and the way that manifested was I'd moved from one part of an organization to another part of the organization. And when I got there, I saw a lot of issues, and I saw a lot of issues from the most senior layers of leadership. And I noticed some really disturbing patterns around what happened when those were brought up. And I started attempting to do what I felt was the right thing based on what I thought a good leader should do. And I was kind of telling myself I'm doing this in the interests of the people on this team who are stuck in a what I consider to be a very bad situation, not making forward progress on something that was very important to the company. And the company did view that thing as very important and were concerned that it wasn't moving and wanted it to be moving faster. And that I felt was part of my role as a leader. The strength of that leadership conflict, the disagreement in approach and how you might think about game production or solving it or all these things was at the root of what became quite a mess. And in the end, there was sort of I think I would love to be able to say there was sort of a mutual parting of ways, but I would say it's fairer to say that uh, after raising some very serious issues that perhaps did have some I believe they did have positive impact. I was basically ejected from that organization, and it was quite a blow. It was the first time something like that had happened to me in my career, and it was very the thing that jumps out to me around that is it wasn't because I was wrong. It wasn't because my assessment of what was going on was incorrect. No one came to me and said like, "Hey, you did a horrible job. You completely misdiagnosed this." I mean, there were people that disagreed with me, but overall, that wasn't the issue. It was more on the political side, what is the consequence of you staying around? How does this impact the relationships and the way they play out? And for me, I was so focused on trying to do the right thing according to the company. Um, I described it to some people as then when I turned around after doing that right thing or what I thought was the right thing, I was like, "You guys have my back, right?" And no one was there. And then the rug got pulled and I fall 3 floors and break a leg, and suddenly I'm like, "What in the world just happened?" I was doing everything I was supposed to be doing, or so I thought, but the environment actually wasn't conducive to that. And, another way I've described it is I was thrown through the wall of my own naivete. Um, and I remember thinking about that afterwards, and, like, part of me wanted to crawl back through the hole and go back to being naive, but I couldn't anymore.
Mm.
Um I'd seen the other side of that, and I'd realized that this isn't about who was right or wrong or what was the best thing. There were whole other layers to this. And by those layers, I had actually messed up pretty dramatically. And there was a lot of learning to be done there. One was the realization that I'd outsourced my self worth to the company, to be how I describe it. I had decided no longer to evaluate my own capability from myself or people around me. I had instead just said like, well, if the company says I'm good, then I'm good. And if the company says I'm not good, then I'm not good. And so what I need to do is make sure the company says I'm good. So I need to do all the right things for the company. And this, I think, is naive, but I think it's also really common because we don't know a lot when we first start our roles. And even as we grow in our careers, it's helpful to have someone external assessing. And there's wisdom in that. If everybody thinks you're a jerk, everybody in your life thinks you're a jerk, you it's possible you're not a jerk and everybody else is wrong, but it's more likely that you're a jerk. And so it's useful to pay attention to what other people think of you. However, that can go too far and you can become entirely externally validated. And that was the state I realized I had been in. And so in some sense, desperation to be approved, I had pushed too hard and too far and done things. And I looked back at it and I said, wait a minute, why was this so important to me? It was, well, because they control how I view myself. I gave them that. I gave up my self-assessment. I gave it to them. They got to assess me, and I just trusted whatever they said. So that was one lesson.
But before you go into the next one, so
Yeah.
I mean, this is so interesting. We can talk about this forever. How? I mean, I guess there's a balance between being pragmatic and being true to certain values, your own or
Yep.
others. This is the kind of conversation that comes up, for example, in politics.
Yes.
The
Yep.
super pragmatic politician versus someone who stands for certain values and are not going to budge, just because it would be practical for in that situation to do something else. And I don't know if there's a right answer to this, but I do know that there's always a balance. And you said something interesting there. You said that you kind of wish that you could crawl back and get that naivete back. But can
Yeah.
you elaborate on tell me more about that? Because if you just introspect that statement you did, exactly how much of that do you want? All your nativity back, or do you want some of it back? I mean, just tell me more about that.
Imagine you joined your dream job, and when you got there, you were constantly trying to figure out if you were good enough to succeed. But it was amazing, and there were good mentors around you, and you were working on really cool problems. And I mean, there were problems. Sure, every place has problems. No place is perfect, right? This side of eternity, depending on your belief system. But it, you're really, really just you're like in that culture, in that organization. You believe the values. You try to be an ambassador of them and a magnifier of them around wherever you go. Even if it's not inside that organization, you're really into it. Like, it's like, this is really exciting. This is who I want to be. And that there's something that feels really good about that. There's a sense of belonging you get. There's an identity that you have. There's a you have peers and allies all around you helping you, and you're excited because you're all going towards the same thing. And then you discover that, yeah, but it's not all actually like that. Yeah, but there's an idealism there. There's an aspiration that's not being achieved. In fact, perhaps in some places actively being avoided because the consequences of it being present would endanger people's jobs or make someone not be perceived as positively as they prefer to be or something like that. And suddenly you're alone. And that was the being thrown through the wall of my own naivete. I think the reality was I was always my own independent agent in that system. Um, but I bought something that said, no, no, no. If I'm just with this group, then I am fully part of this thing, and I can get behind all of its goals, and it is correct, and I can trust it, and there was so much that was wrapped into that idea. And again, an outsourcing of a lot of my own critical thinking around the organization, around myself, and in the context of that organization, what it was trying to do, how it operated. Again, I knew that it wasn't perfect, but in my mind, it kind of was, or it should have been. And my job was to help it become perfect. And there was a pleasant, simple purpose to that. But reality is really complex and nuanced. And so when I got thrown through that wall, I was forced to confront the complexity of these other layers. And when I say I kind of wanted to crawl back through, I wanted to go back to just being part of that group again and being able to outsource and not worry about all those things now that I was aware of and not have to think about them and not have to, like, oh, that's, that stuff doesn't happen here. Or we don't have to worry about that. Or like, just do the right thing and it'll all work out. And these sorts of things are like that. I wanted to go back to that place, but I couldn't. Or at least I couldn't in good conscience.
Mhm.
Because I knew now, and it wasn't, the funny thing is too, it wasn't like, oh, I realized the company was awful and the organization sucked and everything was a sham and it was all fake. No, it's never that either. It's not, you don't get the perfection, but it's also not, it was still a really good place to work. It was still an amazing company. It's just that I'd put it on a pedestal and now I'd realized I shouldn't have done that. I should have maintained some personal distance and some space. I allowed it to take over too much of what I needed to maintain for myself. And so I hope that helps answer the question, but
Yeah.
that's what I mean when I say going through the wall of my own naivete and wanting to crawl back through. But I didn't. I couldn't.
You said there was a second crossroad.
Yeah. Second crossroad. So this was, gosh, I showed up on a team, and at the time I was in charge of way too many teams because I thought that was how you got ahead. And I'd been in game dev maybe less than a year at this point, and I was scrum mastering this and that and the other thing and being a producer, and I was product owning, and I was doing all kinds of stuff, and I was trying to just work, and um I I remember soon after that I realized I was burning out. I couldn't do it all, and I needed to actually focus. And in order to focus, I had to figure out what was most important. And so I picked one of the teams. It was an environment art team. Um, and I said to my boss, and I thought like, oh, they're not going to like this. But I said, I'm going to put down all the other teams. I'm going to figure out the backfill, or we're going to figure that out, or we're going to leave them without this role for now. But I need to focus on this team because I think it's the most important one of all these teams. And that they need my full attention. Actually, I can't do this splitting thing anymore. It's not tenable. And I don't know. I think some people probably were like, "Oh, Ben's messing up. He's failing. He's screwed it up." Um, but I think there were other people that realized like, "Oh, that's actually really smart." And that team ended up growing quite a bit. It like tripled in size over the course of the next couple of years. Um, and that, amongst many other learnings, were things I realized while I was working on that team about how you actually get to a place of focusing on the goal and what it means to actually lead and not just manage, not just keep the process running or make sure the systems all work, but to actually take a look at where you are in your organization and your company and ask the question, what does it mean for me to add the most value here? And then to do some things that maybe people don't even want you to do, to attempt to achieve that, attempt to get that higher value out of the organization through your action. And I mean, there are, so many fun stories that came through that. And they're like, I can talk about release roadmaps and how they evolved over the course of that project. I can talk about the way the leaders around me both supported me and I supported them. And we had such a strong group of people that we built over time. How we went from taking months and months and months to produce anything that seemed remotely valuable to by the time we were shipping, like stuff was coming out so fast, it just boggled the mind. And the shifts and the changes and the focuses and the people, and there's so many cool lessons. But I think fundamentally to me, it was this realization of my job here is to have as much positive impact as I can on this team, on this game, on this company. And I actually have to be deliberate as I go about doing that. I can't just let life and work happen to me and just do all the things that I see that could be done. I have to pick. I have to try to be tactically intelligent and strategically wise as I invest my time. And sometimes that means not doing something that seems really important because there's something else that's even more important. And and being able to have that conversation with someone who disagrees with your priorities and all these different things. But by the end of that time, I felt very grounded in what it meant to be a producer as a leader and to affect positive change at scale with other leaders through teams, without it also being something where I told everybody what to do. Because that team, at its largest, it was over 50 people, and there were only 2 producers on the whole thing. Um, there there was so much to be done that, and I couldn't keep track of it all. And how do you set up a world where that's okay? Because other people are. And there were so many different sets of expertise. There were so many skill sets involved. I didn't know how most of them worked. Um, that was okay. And how do I lead when I don't know what my people are doing? And these are questions that people ask, and I now have answers to them, and I have a foundation for that, and I have reasons of why I see the world the way I do. But a lot of it's grounded in that sort of formative experience in my career.
There was something you said there. You said tactically, you said strategically wise, but before that you said tactically. What word do you use?
Oh, what did I use?
Well, I mean, the way I interpreted what you said, it was that you need to make the right tactical prioritizations.
Yeah.
In alignment, with being strategically wise. But when you said it to me, I felt like, oh, this sounds like what it truly means to be, from a leadership producer, a good producer. To be honest, a good startup CEO as well.
Hmm.
Um, um, can you? So what does? Can you? Making the right tactical prioritizations and what does strategically wise mean? Can you just go a little bit deeper on this?
Yeah. I'll give a couple definitions. So, and they're very pragmatic. I would, you'd find a million definitions for all these things. But if vision is the impact of the change that you're trying to see in the world, um, what you want to be different after you're done, we all have a vision for our role, and sometimes it's not stated, and it's not even understood. And I think a lot of leaders could benefit from actually stopping and going, "What is my vision for my role?" And I don't mean you personally. I mean for the team you lead, the product you're making, whatever it is. What is your vision for that thing? The reason I think that's so important is if you don't know what that is, you don't know what strategies to employ. And strategies are like where you're choosing to play, the things you're choosing to invest resources in. And depending on your scale, that might be figuring out where people go or where you invest money. But even at an individual level, if you're leading a team, a single team, where do you spend your time? Are you spending it on the places where you've chosen to play in order to achieve the vision, right? These are the strategies. These are the techniques I'm going to, and strategy is usually like a larger scale thing, but to think about it, even in that role of a leader on a team, where am I going to invest time so that this team can become closer to the ideal vision I have in my mind of what it should be? And it's an endless journey. You never get there because it keeps changing, and you change, and the team changes, and the circumstances change, and the product changes, and the audience changes. Everything changes. But you have to keep redefining that vision and then keep moving the team towards it. So you pick your strategies. And once you have your strategies in, you're like, okay, I'm going to do this through, I don't know, building strong relationships with everybody on the team. This is a good strategy to use when you're on a smaller team. It doesn't scale particularly well. I've seen people try. When you get to like 30, 40 people, if you're still the person who needs to know who everybody's wives and kids' names and their dogs and everything about their life, it starts becoming quite a tax. But let's say you've got like 8 people on a team. That's a decent strategy. to use. Let me get close to the people that are working and see if I can develop a caring relationship, a mutually caring relationship with them, because I do care about them. Hopefully they care about me as well. Hopefully we all care about the product and the audience and whatever that might be. So that's a strategy. And then a tactic is, okay, well, how am I actually developing those relationships? So tactically, what does that mean? And I think that I don't remember the word I used because I'm improvisational in my speech, but the idea behind my mind when I said tactically something was like tactically efficient might be a way to say it. How do I not overinvest in the wrong things tactically, in the like moment to moment, in the techniques, the meetings I'm choosing to walk into, the emails I'm choosing to send, the moment to moment, the things I'm choosing to correct. How do I make wise tactical choices there in the interests of being also strategically wise around where I've chosen to play in order to achieve the vision for what I want this to look like? And so it all comes down from that vision. But then it's, what is a technique I can use? And there's different things. Maybe I develop relationships with people by going to lunch with them a couple times a week, right? The whole team gets together, we go to lunch. Maybe I do individual lunches. Maybe I do one-on-ones with everybody on a regular basis. Maybe I've got some engineers, some designers, some QA on my team. Maybe I talk with all the engineers together one time and ask about how engineering's going. And all of this, what I'm doing is I'm gaining information because I'm trying to develop, one of my strategies is to develop relationships with these people so I can stay in touch with the actual problems that the team is facing and not be a disconnected leader who sort of comes down from on high and like upsets how the sprint review works because I read a book somewhere. And, that you see that a lot. You see a lot of mistakes made there where people are like, they're trying to help, but they're not paying attention. And so I develop relationships. Now, again, doesn't scale. So as we grow our scale, the vision changes, the strategies evolve. Now, maybe that strategy of direct relationship with everybody on my team becomes I have a direct relationship with my key leaders, and I'm helping them be close to their team, close to the people doing the work. And so now I go like, well, if that's the strategy I want, now there's like a cascade, there's a hierarchy here. I'm going to be relating to those leaders, and those leaders are going to be relating to the individual developers. What are the techniques, the tactics that I'm going to use to make sure that they're staying in touch with the team and I'm staying in touch with them? How do I do that? And there's different ways to do that. And that, again, that's a tactical. And you want to be careful because I think a lot of times we look at this backwards. We don't start from the vision, figure out where we want to play, what matters, what doesn't, and then select our tactics appropriately. I think a lot of times we go, oh, I know a technique or a tactic that could help this team. Let me go apply it. And the problem is there's an infinity of ways that you can improve a team. And if you just every time you see one, go after it, you're going to be that person sort of pushing a million rocks, 1 inch or whatever. And what you really need to do is move the boulder 10 feet. And it's very tempting because a lot of times people will give you a lot of positive feedback if you go around pushing every little pebble an inch. But it's much more meaningful to move the boulder 10 feet. And it's harder. It's harder. There's always a pebble you can just like, oh, I moved that one. I moved that one. I moved that one. This is like, look at what I got, all the stuff I got done this week. Look at all the little improvements I made. Look at all the things I did. It just can feel very satisfying, but it's a tactics first approach. And instead, I think you want to start with a vision, pick the strategy, and then figure out the boulder you want to move, and then start moving it.
Would you, I mean, there's often a lot of discussion around like, what's the strategy, what's, what are tactical decisions? And I can sometimes feel like there's a bit of unnecessary friction around that because different people have different definitions. So it's, it becomes like a conversation about the conversation. And in,
Yep.
and in those situations, maybe it can be helpful to simply view it as what's one person's tactic is the next person's vision, a little bit depending on,
Yeah, absolutely. Can be. Yeah.
Which time horizon you operate on.
Mhm.
And but I can also see that there are benefits to seeing it a little bit different. For example, if it becomes very the example you just gave, where it becomes a little bit, tactic first, so to say. Do you? This leads me. There was some. I'm a big fan of your podcast, and there was one thing discussed that I instantly had, like, two questions that I wanted to ask you,
Hmm.
because you have worked so much on the production side of things, but that also means that you are working with creatives. So
Yep.
um, I'm not entirely sure that your guest actually said this, but the way I kind of heard it was a little bit, the importance of articulate the vision.
Hmm.
Um, but I think often, especially with creative leaders, sometimes the most interesting and potentially um, financially rewarding vision for a company, for a product, and for something in that product might not, the person who, I can find that the person can actually have a strong feeling for that vision, but are not able to articulate it that well.
Hmm.
So you might, so if I do like two cases here, you have like one person who articulates a very clear vision, but that might actually not be a very exciting vision. Um, and then you have the other one who has a strong feel for what is the vision, but can't really, put it down on paper, or I should say maybe a favorite card. So
Hmm.
if we have that, let's say that you agree with my statement there, that that's something that can happen. Would you also then say that quite an important part of your job as a producer is to help, kind of like distill that, and to help make that something for others to understand. Um, and that might mean, and this is where we get into the tactics. That might mean simply finding ways to have it documented. It might mean who needs to simply speak more with each other and vibe, um,
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. What's your thought on this?
Yeah. Oh, I 100% agree. Um, like if I'm a producer on a team, so there's different types of producers in the games industry. I'd say most fall into the operational side of the organization. How does the team function? How does the work get done? What are the work systems around it? The work management systems that we use, such as Favreau or other things. Um, and then there's the product oriented lens that some producers take, and that's about the vision for the product and like what are we prioritizing and all this different stuff. In all cases, in my opinion, if a producer does not know where the team and the product should be going, what the goal state, what the vision is, um, and they've been there a while and they think everything's fine, they're wrong. To your point, they should be engaging the people who are responsible for owning those visions, be it you're a design-led organization or where designers sort of make a lot of those vision-related calls around what the game and product should be. You need to be helping extract that information. And yeah, like I love the things you said. Sometimes that's through some amount of documentation or helping them frame it in a different way. Hey, here's the model for how you could express a vision. Try to use these, if you've ever heard of vivid descriptors, or do a stack rank of the top goals for what this will achieve, or talk to me about how the player is going to feel or what they're going to experience. Break it into a journey map. There's a million tools you can use, and they all have use. And I've used like a ton of them, and they've been helpful. Um, almost all of them have been helpful to some degree or another. Um, but I think that is part of your job, because you are to be an ambassador of that as a leader of the team. You are to hold that vision. And sometimes you're the one, if you're a product oriented producer or you're the only producer and nobody else is doing it, you may be actually defining that. You may be creating that vision. But I think to your point, not everybody's great at articulating it. Sometimes they have a feel for what it might be, but they can't quite say it. And so, great. How are we going to have the conversations? Or, and this one is interesting. Is there cheap ways we can test things? We can prototype something. We can spin up a quick demo that helps us go this, not that. That helps through seeing it live. And this is an advantage of if you can iterate rapidly in either art or code or both, like within the game, in design, whatever it might be. If you can iterate rapidly, you can use very simple, rough, throwaway type stuff to help us all get to on the same page around what it is we're trying to do. Um, And so there's a bunch of techniques that you can use there. But yes, a producer's role is to understand both what the product should be it a game, a feature, an asset, whatever, and also what the team should be, and then find ways to get that out. You're never going to get 100% alignment, but to get enough alignment. So, like the thing I like to say is, you want most of the people going mostly the right direction most of the time, right? And if you can achieve that state, if you can get most of the people going most of the right direction most of the time, and most I'm leaving deliberately vague, um, then you might be winning. And you get to pick how much most is. But the higher you want most, like the closer to 100% you want most to be, the more overhead you have. And the lower it is, the less overhead you have, but also the more you run the risk of wasted work. And so if alignment's really, really, really important, you're going to need to spend some time having conversations in meetings, doing documentation, testing things, trying stuff, asking, is this the right thing, redoing work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if it's not that important, if it's okay for people to kind of be going in a bunch of different directions, um, as long as there's like a broad, rough, set of boundaries that we're all operating within, then you might not need as much overhead. But usually organizations start in a place where what we're trying to do is actually find where we're going,
Yeah.
especially in game development. And so you start, and a lot of the stuff you have to do is like, look, we're going to keep a pretty light frame on this whole thing, a light process on over this whole thing to allow us to get where we're trying to go.
Yeah, I think we're onto something truly important here, which is, around alignment, and we can talk forever about alignment. But from a product quality point of view, and quality here as game being truly exciting to play, I think you can work in a way that drives alignment towards something good, or you can have driving towards something bad.
Mm-hmm.
What I think I'm onto here is that if we contrast two different cultures here, where you have one culture where everything has become kind of corporate, so they're like, okay, we need more alignment, and in that organization people interpret that as, oh, we need to have document stuff in more Jira tickets,
Right.
and you have a ton of people spending a lot of work with documentation, but no one really cares, and in that organization might be the one who's best at writing stuff down, that's the one best explaining a vision, but that might not be the most exciting vision. And then you can
Yep.
contrast that with another company where, obviously, kind of my views behind why we design favorite the way we've done shines through here, but where instead of having a pilot ticket, it should be one card, and you want people having a collaborative effort around that. But that also means
Yes.
friction. But this is the creative friction. You want to expose. Oh, we actually don't agree. What does this how should this character really come out in the game? We don't have agreement. We need to have more conversation around this. We need to test things. We need to apply all those tools that you said before. And this is where I think we get to that. If you have a culture around production, you have producers that are approaching this situation in like, okay, how can we apply some of those tools that you mentioned to make sure that we as a team get to an alignment around something exciting, because there's something exciting here. It's just that we haven't been able to really find it. So you kind of purposely are maybe creating some of those frictions by using some of these exercises. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's the culture, and that's where we get into that whole conversation around that. From a creative process, it's not like process is bad for creativity. So, some processes are bad for creativity, but there are also ways of working that are good for creativity. Slight
Yes.
side note here: I was just finishing Rick Rubin, the famous music producer's book around creativity, and it's an amazing book. It's a book that I think it's an incredibly helpful for someone like me who comes more from the business and like production point of view, to have better frameworks to discuss with creatives, and to be honest, also be able to call bullshit sometimes. But it's an even better book for people that come from the creative side and actually wants to have like a way of thinking. And even using the word process for actually how to be a better creative. So I mean, I think it's very clear that there are these, like, you can have these two different environments, these two different cultures,
Yep.
where the producer has a lot of work to do, but what that work looks like is quite different in these two, and like what trust looks like is very different in these two, and hopefully it's pretty clear which one will create the most exciting games and which place will be the most rewarding place to work.
I hope you liked that interview. If you did, you know what to do. Share it on your favorite social media so others can learn from the Favor community.